Welcome to Nevertheless Podcast with Bidemi Makmodi, a show dedicated to organic leaders and leaderpreneurs. Today, you would learn how to discover your essence and live more powerfully.
Hello and welcome to Nevertheless, a show for organic leaders and leaderpreneurs. My name is Bidemi Makmodi. This is week 3 in the series Wholeness. And we're exploring the subject of wholeness. And really what we're looking at is the thing that triggers the need for wholeness, which is brokenness. Because you can't have the wholeness conversation without knowing what brokenness is about. So in this episode, we want to explore the different types of brokenness. Remember that in the previous episode, we asked the question, what is wrong with me? And the reason why we asked that question is so that we can tell, we can do a self-audit, ask questions, and find out where exactly whatever broke in us or whatever is causing our brokenness comes from, so that we can submit it for fixing, or we can take responsibility for fixing it. So in the previous episode, we looked at why people don't ask the question, what is wrong with me? We say things like, I'm okay, I'm not that bad, no one is perfect, and all of that. But I remember that I told you that being functional is not the same as being whole, and being imperfect is not the same thing as the fact that brokenness is okay. Brokenness is not okay and will never be okay in the lives of God's children. It is the reason why God says, come to me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. God is constantly inviting us through our brokenness to come so that he can fix us. And this series has been curated so that we will come to the place where we understand that while it is not peculiar to us that we are broken, we can come to him to be fixed, and we will come and receive healing. Remember that the scripture that has run across the episode so far is a scripture in John chapter 5. In John chapter 5, we saw the man who had been at the pool of Bethesda for 38 years. And the first time Jesus came across him, recognizing how long he'd been there, Jesus asked him, do you want to be made whole? I told us that that question was not a question of, do you want healing? The question was, do you really want to do the work to arrive at the place of wholeness? Because to be healed is one thing, to be whole is something else. So today we want to look at the types of brokenness. That is, where does brokenness come from? What are the types of brokenness that exist? And what should we do about them? That's what we are looking at in this episode today. So there are 3 basic types of brokenness. The first one is what we call hereditary or generational brokenness. Hereditary or generational brokenness. This is brokenness that is in the bloodline and is inherited. It's passed down from one generation to another generation to another generation. Brokenness like this would include anger, alcoholism, addictions, promiscuity. These are traits, broken character traits that consistently manifest in a certain family from one generation to another generation. So you see a young man, they will be like, oh, that his grandfather was an alcoholic. And this young man is barely 23. He's already a full-blown alcoholic. You see a young lady, they will say, oh, the grandmother and the great-grandmother were promiscuous. And you see this young lady towing that line. That is hereditary brokenness. You didn't start it, but you're suffering from it. Like I told us, most brokenness, especially like hereditary brokenness, is not your fault. But it doesn't mean that you can't take responsibility of insisting that the buck stops with you. When I think about generational brokenness and the things that, I have noticed in my bloodline, I made up my mind that whatever it is that I can discern in my bloodline that has brought me to the place of brokenness, I was going to deal with it, put a stop to it so that it doesn't go on to the next generation, and that will be my children. Because whether we like it or not, brokenness brings pain. And unless we know what triggered it or where it started from, we may not know where it ended. And no, this is not an African tale. Go everywhere in the world. What you will find is that there are hereditary brokenness. They exist. Otherwise, explain to me why a grandfather was an alcoholic and the grandson is an alcoholic. Explain to me why one person has a proclivity for addiction, and in that family you find that maybe there are 5 brothers or 5 siblings and they all have children. And what you find is one child in each of those families has an addiction problem. It is something to do with the genetics or the generations and then that needs to be fixed. Because unless someone takes the responsibility to stand in the place of spiritual warfare and then do the work, first acknowledge that this is happening in our bloodline and do the work of putting a stop to it, 10 generations down the line, it will still be traced and they say, oh, that family, they have the tendency to be addictive to something. The second type of brokenness is social or societal brokenness. We live in a fallen world. So because we live in a fallen world, societal values have gone to the dust. You find that in some environments, there is no moral standard at all. And the more especially in these days of social media where everybody is for himself and I don't know who's for all the rest of us, you find that because of that brokenness in the society, in the world, because of the fallen state of the world, what do you find? You find men are perpetuating things that they ought not to perpetuate because they have an excuse in societal brokenness. What does that mean? What I mean is that because we live in a fallen world, we find that our societies have become breeding ground for all kinds of wickedness and brokenness. So for instance, you find people who say, oh, that they went into crime because of poverty. Poverty is a fallout of societal brokenness. Yes? But when you take a look at it, really, if we're taking responsibility, in that same society where someone is saying they went into crime because of poverty, there are others who live under the same exact conditions and they did not go into crime. The point is, when the society is broken, men use it as an excuse to perpetuate things that further break the society. So it becomes this vicious thing that is going round and round and round. Oh, it's poverty that caused it. That's why I did this. And in the place of crime, you find them in addiction. And then from addiction, you find promiscuity. And it just becomes a mess all around. Why is that so? Social brokenness. When God, again, I told us that when God saw that the word was without form and void in Genesis 1, God did not shut the door and go to bed. He took responsibility, said, this is my creation, and I'm the one that will fix it. When it comes to society, we tend to always think that our leaders ought to fix society. But all of us need to come together, acknowledge that our society is broken, and begin to fix that brokenness if our families and our households would not suffer from that brokenness. If you ask me, the man that said that it's poverty that pushed him to crime, my response will be, if the day he agrees to take responsibility, the day he stops and he asks himself, what is wrong with me? If he has the right person holding his hands, he might just find that what was wrong with him was not poverty. What was wrong with him was a lack of consideration for others. Because the one he went to commit crime and, let's say, probably stole from, is also living under the same poverty conditions that he was living under. So we have generational or hereditary brokenness, and we have societal or social brokenness. The third kind of brokenness is the personal brokenness. Now, personal brokenness for me is split into. There is the part where things happen to you. It's your personal brokenness, but it was done to you. And then there is brokenness that happens to me because I made a decision or I made a bad choice. So when it comes to personal brokenness, we have the exception. All this while I've been saying that brokenness is not your fault, but it's your responsibility to fix. But when it comes to personal brokenness that was triggered or that was activated out of bad choices or bad decision, who's at fault? It's both your fault and it's both your responsibility to fix. But there's brokenness that happens to you and as an individual. Maybe trauma. Yesterday I was counseling with someone who lost both her parents in the space of 8 months or thereabout or less. That person needs to take responsibility for their healing and come to the place of healing. Otherwise, that can be something that will continue to break other things in her life. So that's trauma. I'm not sure any one of us will go asking that both our parents would die within the same year, let alone within the same month. But that happens to people. That's trauma. There is also things that happen when others, because they do not value us, they treat us in a certain way. They degrade us, whether it's verbal abuse, whether it's physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. That is personal brokenness because it can't be passed on to the next person. So it happened to an individual and only that individual has to deal with it. But if that individual doesn't take responsibility for their wholeness and get up and do what they need to do, that individual can now formulate a coping mechanism that now goes on to break other people. So whether directly or indirectly, their brokenness is breaking other people. But then there's the brokenness that is triggered or activated by a bad decision. People who go out and decide that, I want to just be fly. And for the first time, they take drugs. It made them feel good. They come back the same day. It was one decision. Brokenness that happened because a young man decided that he would not listen to the counsel of his parents. And one day he was picked up with the wrong crowd and he went to prison. That has started a degenerating trait of brokenness that if not quickly apprehended and fixed, that may become something that becomes the entirety of that person's life. So we've looked at 3 kinds of brokenness so far: hereditary or generational brokenness, societal or social brokenness, and then personal brokenness, broken into 2, the things people do to us and the things we do to ourselves. So you find abuse, and then you find rejection, you find abandonment. But you also find decisions to abuse things, decisions to go the wrong direction that end up coming to haunt us in our future. The point is, whether it's society, whether it's hereditary, whether it's generational, whether it's personal, the point is that your brokenness may not be your fault, but it is your responsibility to find wholeness. Here's what I know. There is not one person who cannot arrive at wholeness. So when I'm counseling or I'm coaching with people and they say to me, I just can't, I take exceptions to that kind of language. And I insist that they see themselves through the right filter. Because there's nothing that goes wrong that can't be fixed if we journey with God. I'm going to take a break now. When I come back, I'll be looking at characters in the Bible who it was their brokenness that got them into the things that they experienced. I'll look at 2 characters. I'll look at one whose brokenness made him irredeemable, if you like, and another one who, despite his brokenness, he made decisions that were empowering so that he could put a stop to what could have destroyed his life. Please do not go away. I'll be right back. This is the Nevertheless Show, and my name is Bidemi Makmodi. God bless you.
In a world filled with many fears and discouragement, life often becomes a burden. For those who know the way, life is just simple. Do not worry, you're not alone on this life's journey, as Bidemi Makmodi shares powerful insights and principles from her everyday work and life experiences in her book, Nevertheless. Nevertheless is a book designed to encourage and equip you to face life with courage, hope, and determination. Get a copy of Nevertheless and other books written by Bidemi Makmordi, like The Wisdom of the Seed, Honor, The Theology of Work, and so much more from a bookstore nearby. Or call 080-905-63555. Or send an email to bidemi@bidemimakmordi.com to place your order. I guarantee you will make it. Nevertheless.
Hi, welcome back to the Nevertheless show. We've been in a series that we've titled Wholeness, and this episode we were looking at the types of brokenness. Before I went on the break, I spoke about generational or hereditary brokenness. I spoke about social or societal brokenness, and I spoke about personal brokenness. And that was split into two: brokenness that happens to you personally and brokenness you cause for yourself. And we looked at that. And all of this is geared towards one thing and one thing alone: for us to acknowledge that there's brokenness in our lives and to take responsibility for fixing. If there was anything that has become a quote that you should pay attention to in this series, it is the fact that your brokenness may not be your fault, but your wholeness is your responsibility. Your brokenness may not be your fault, but your wholeness is a responsibility. Before we went on the break, I said that when we come back, we'll look at Bible characters, one who took his brokenness and did nothing with it, and another one who took his brokenness and decided to take responsibility for his life and ended well. I want to talk to you about the man Samson and the man Joseph. In the book of Judges, we see the account of Samson. Samson started well. Before he was born, there was a plan for his life. God announced that he was going to be born to his parents. God gave his parents the template and the standard and the parameters for Samson's life. Soon after Samson was born, the rule was no alcohol would touch his lips, his hair would not be cut, and he would not eat dead things. So he had his path clearly articulated for him. And I mean, if all of us had our paths that clearly articulated for us, we ought to make a success of it. But Samson, in the course of his journey, fell in love with a certain woman. Number one, he wasn't supposed to do anything with foreign women, but he fell in love with some foreign woman, and he insisted, regardless of how his parents kicked against it, he insisted that he wanted to marry the woman. They gave way to him, and he completed all the rites. On the day that he went to get his wife, he found out that his wife had been given to another person, and that was what wounded Samson. From that point on, Samson acted like someone without parameters. That brokenness, he couldn't walk his way back to fix. And because of that, we saw him in different things. He ate, out of the carcass of a lion or a bear, I can't remember now, when he had been told clearly that he couldn't eat dead things. He allowed Delilah, his quote-unquote girlfriend at the time, he shared the secret to his strength with Delilah, and they cut his hair. Ultimately, they gouged out Samson's eyes, and he was thrown in prison. Everybody will say, in the end, Samson destroyed the Philistines in the temple. But the truth of the matter is, nowhere was it written at the beginning of Samson's life that Samson was going to die with the ones that God asked him to go destroy. I do not think that would have been God's best for him. But because because something broke in Samson's life, and Samson refused to take responsibility of for that thing and find a fix for his faults, he ended up the way he ended up. On the other hand, let's look at Joseph. Joseph was also a son born to parents. Joseph was a child that his parents had to wait for. At least his mother had to wait many years before he was born. There was nothing special surrounding Joseph's birth. There was no clearly defined template for Joseph's life as Samson had. But Joseph had a gift, the gift of dreams. And by that gift, he realized that God had called him to great things. And that started Joseph's journey. The dream that he was called to great things was also the reason why his brothers hated him. Ultimately, they sold him into slavery. And he found himself in Egypt, in the house of Potiphar. And while he was in Potiphar's house, he served so diligently that he was put in charge of everything in Potiphar's house. I mean, if you went through the kind of life that Joseph went through, it is not impossible that you would not want to serve anyone again. But Joseph got into Potiphar's house and he did everything how he should do it. He was honoring, he was diligent, he didn't steal, he did none of those things that could cast aspersion at his character. Yet, Mrs. Potiphar set a trap for him. And she tried to lure him into her bed. When he refused, she framed him and told her husband and anyone else who cared to listen that he tried to have his way with her. And that earned Joseph a trip to prison. Joseph would have said, "It is unfair. I don't do anything and yet I find myself in trouble." That could have broken Joseph to the extent that he would never do nice things again. But Joseph got into prison, regardless of what was broken in his life at the time, starting from his brothers selling him into slavery. Joseph got into prison and he realized what I want us to realize by this series, that he is responsible for his wholeness. He got into prison and he served just as diligently as he's always done. And in that time, he made friends with, nurtured relationships with the butler and the baker to Pharaoh at the time. And in the process, they dreamt. They didn't share with Joseph what their dreams were. But Joseph was so observant that he noticed their countenance. And in trying to find out what went wrong, they shared that they dreamt. And Joseph, because he had also the gift of the interpretation of dreams, interpreted their dreams. And in the end, exactly how they said it, how he interpreted the dreams, was how it unfolded. Years later, Pharaoh himself dreams. At that point, the butler remembers Joseph, and Joseph was brought out of the prison. Long and short of this account, you know it, Joseph became the prime minister in Egypt. Here's the point. Sometimes your brokenness becomes the fuel with which you go on to make a difference and become an impact in the lives of others. Because at the end of, or towards the end of Joseph's journey, what we found out was that God was the one that sent him ahead to Egypt so that his entire family, including the brothers that sold him into slavery, would be preserved in the years of famine. The point I'm making is that when you ask the question, what is wrong with me? You are bound to find answers to be able to know what exactly went wrong. When you are able to discern or decode what kind of brokenness you suffer, whether it's hereditary brokenness, social one, or personal brokenness, then you can distill the help, or you can determine the help that you need. Of course, if it is hereditary, then there is first spiritual help that you need to seek. And then number two, there is a raising of your guard to know that in my family, for instance, if that's you, addiction is a proclivity, that we have a proclivity for addiction, to determine that you would stay away from addictive substances as best as you can. That's how you take charge of your life. The point I'm making with this particular segment of this episode is that Samson did not take charge. He thought that because something broke in him or someone broke his heart, that it gave him license to act like someone who had no boundaries. Joseph, on the other hand, every calculation to break his spirit along with his heart and his life determined that he would not submit to be destroyed because people do not see his value. And it is glaring how both of them ended up. That when we take responsibility for our wholeness, God gets in the trenches with us and ensures that we receive wholeness. The point is that wholeness can be achieved. How do I do this? Number one, follow the pain. Acknowledge the pain. Because, you see, brokenness is not all that there is. Brokenness causes pain. And once the pain is there, no matter what you do, your pain will speak. I used to tell people that pain has a voice. So no matter how hard you try to bury pain, it will speak sometimes in your own words. It will manifest in the words you speak. It will speak in your attitude. It will speak in how you do relationships with other people. Samson's one break messed up every other thing that he did. Joseph, even though he had series of breaks, determined that who he knew that God called him to be was who he was going to end up as. So you must acknowledge the pain that your brokenness is emitting. Acknowledge it. My heart is broken. I am hurting. To say I'm hurting is not the same as to say I am weak. To hurt is not a sign of weakness. So you shouldn't be afraid to say that you hurt. Acknowledge the pain. Number two, follow the pain. That is, trace it, because if I'm hurting, my next step should be, what is it? Who did what to me? What was done to me? What did I do to myself that makes me hurt this bad? So follow the pain. If you follow the pain, you will trace the trigger, or at least you trace the first place that breakage was activated in your life. Number three, trust outside eyes. What does that mean? It's rare that the one who is broken is the one that can fix himself. Even if the one who's broken takes responsibility for their lives, they usually need outside help to be able to get themselves fixed. So you need to ask for help. The previous episode I told us, get a counselor, get a coach, get therapy, whatever it takes. What is not okay is for you to pretend that you are okay. If you're broken, shout it at the rooftops, I'm broken here. Someone who has surmounted that process would be able to hold your hand, or someone who's trained to help people through that kind of bend will be able to hold your hand and bring you to healing. I want us to understand that coping mechanisms are not the same as healing. When you go to some people to ask for healing or to seek healing, they will talk to you about meditations. They'll talk to you about affirmations. They'll talk to you about many things. These things in themselves do not heal. What heals is you. You are the one who allows yourself to heal. Meditation may put you in a stable stream of mind so that you can walk out your healing. Affirmations may put you in a state of joy and strength so that you can walk out your healing. But these things standing on their own do not heal. So do not go somewhere and copy meditations and stuff like that and think that will bring you to healing. Your best and most trusted way to come to healing is to trust God with your brokenness. God will in turn lead you to a man or a woman who can hold your hand and bring you to wholeness. When we come back next week, we will be looking at healing, how to come to healing when it comes to brokenness and in pursuit of wholeness. Thank you so much for keeping the faith. This has been the Nevertheless Show, a show for organic leaders and leaderpreneurs. My name is Bidemi Makmode. Remember to follow me on social media. All my handles are Bidemi McMurdy. So please follow me and let's take the conversation beyond this place. If you have a question, do send an email, bidemi@bidemimacmurdy, or simply just leave a comment and ask your question, and I'll deal with it either directly to you or in another broadcast such as this one. Remember that when you discover your purpose, you live a powerful life. Remember again that your brokenness may not be your fault, but your wholeness is your responsibility. I'll see you next week. God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Nevertheless. For more information and resources, call 080-90563-555 or send an email to bidemi@bidemimacmurdy.com. Don't forget, discovering your purpose helps you live more powerfully.